A quick note, whenever you're replacing your caliper bracket, it's a good idea to make sure you get yourself some slider boots as well. Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our caliper bracket. That's going to be located right behind the wheel. With that said, we're going to have to safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we'll use a 22mm socket to remove this center cover and then all of the lug nuts. Carefully remove your wheel. Now with the wheel out of the way, we have a nice clear view of the entire caliper. That's this area here. The bracket is this area. We're going to have to go ahead and get this entire thing out of the way. So to start, I'm going to come right in this center area here with a small pry bar. I'm going to gently try prying between the caliper and the rotor just to push back the two pistons that are located inside the caliper. We're only going to go a little bit, just enough so we can move this. There we are. At this point, I can move this caliper around a little bit. We should be able to continue on by removing the two caliper bracket mounting bolts. For those two caliper bracket bolts that are located right behind the caliper, we're going to use an 18mm wrench to remove these. If you find that the bolt is too tight up along the top here, you could carefully try to use a rubber mallet, give it a couple bonks on the wrench just to break it free. For this bolt, I'm going to fully remove it. Once I quickly inspect it, I'm going to go ahead and put it back in just a few threads to hold the caliper still for me so I can continue on by removing the next one. Make my way down to the lower bolt. For this one, you can use a socket. Fully remove that bolt, give it a quick inspection, do the same to the other, and set them aside. Grab that caliper. We're going to carefully bring it up here. Now the next thing I always like to do is I just put the pads down so they're touching. I don't want to worry about anything happening there. We can make our way to our two caliper slider bolts. To remove these, let's use a T55 Torx socket. Now at this point, you're going to want to hold on to that bracket so it can't fall down. Let's carefully remove each of the sliders. We'll give them a quick inspection. And then set them aside. Carefully grab that bracket, lift it up and off of the caliper, and now let's bring this over to the bench. Let's go ahead and start pulling the pads out of the bracket. For this, you just want to carefully slide them out. Whenever I take out the pads, I always just give them a close inspection. As you can tell on these ones right here, they have plenty of thickness left, and I'm not worried about having to replace them. If you found that they were worn down to the point that they were almost at the wear indicator, now's a perfect time to go ahead and do a brake job. That said, go ahead and slide that aside. Pull out this pad, inspection, that looks good. The next thing we're going to do is start removing the tins. We'll use a pocket screwdriver or pretty much anything you have that can get in between this area. Gently pry it off. Give it a quick inspection. You're going to want to go ahead and clean this down with a wire brush or something just to get off any of the dirt or debris. And if you find that you have any rust or anything the like inside of any of this area or even in this channel, you want to make sure you clean that as well. Now at this point, we've taken everything off of the caliper bracket that we can. You'll notice that the slider boots are still on here, and that's because to remove these, you'd have to physically damage them. That's why I recommended getting some new ones. Okay friends, it's time to start preparing our brand new caliper bracket. The first thing that I like to do is apply some high temperature caliper lubricant inside of each of the caliper slider ports. Get it all along that ridge right there. Now once you have it lubricated, the next thing you're going to want to do is put in your slider boot. You can see that there's a metallic shank right here. That needs to line up with this area, and then we need to carefully slide this down and into position so it's completely bottomed out against the bracket. For this, I went ahead and put a 19mm socket over the ridge. Now we can start driving this down. Give it a quick inspection, make sure it's completely bottomed out all the way around. It's super important to make sure that it is so no moisture or debris can make its way into this port. Now I can go ahead and do the exact same thing over here. Okay, both of those slider boots look perfect. Let's continue on with a little bit more of that high temperature caliper grease, and we're going to go along each of these edges on both sides of the bracket. Time to reinstall the tins. Looking at them, you can tell that each of these ears are a little bit different. Also, looking at the bracket, you can tell that one side of this area is a little bit thinner than the other. Go ahead and match it up and slide it into position. Let's get back over to the vehicle. Let's apply a thin amount of that high temperature caliper lubricant to each of the caliper pistons. And then make your way underneath each of these 3 ears. Continuing with that lubricant, let's also lubricate our caliper sliders. You want to make sure that you lubricate the entire shaft, and also make sure you lubricate all the way up into the groove just before the threaded area. That groove is where the boot's going to sit, and it's important to have lubricant here to help keep out moisture or debris. Go ahead and grab onto those brake pads. If you remove them from the bracket and you are not replacing them, it's a good idea to make sure you put them in the original positions. Generally, by looking at the backing, you can tell that it'll either have the 3 ears from the forward side or the circles for the pistons on the inboard side. Slide that right through like that. Do the same to the other pad. Now we can take that bracket, we're going to slide it into position on the caliper. Pay attention to your caliper slider boots. We want to make sure that those holes are lined up with the holes in the caliper. We'll slide each of these pins in here, get them started, then we can snug them up and torque each of these to 80 foot-pounds. Slide this right over the rotor. Now we can take our 2 caliper mounting bolts with some red thread locker. We'll start each of them in and then bottom them out. With them both started, let's snug them up. Now let's torque each of these to manufacturer's specifications. Our application calls for 148 foot-pounds. Now let's just give it one last inspection. You want to make sure everything's situated perfectly and you torque things as needed. After that, go ahead and clean up your mess, grab the wheel, and get ready to install it. Now we can go ahead and put on all 8 of our lug nuts. We'll go ahead and bottom these out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque each of them to 140 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back down on the ground, we can torque each of these lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you had center covers, go ahead and put those on now. Okay friends, we got the truck back together. What's left to do now? Now you're going to want to make sure you get inside that passenger compartment, pump up the brake till it's nice and firm. After that, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.